Broadcasting from Silicon Valley, California, this is Conversations with Jennylyn.
You are watching Conversations with Jennylyn, and as I continue my COVID-19 World Interview Series, the very handsome gentleman sitting across the camera from me is South African Michael Sudarkasa. And he is the CEO of the African Business Group in Johannesburg area. And I am very grateful to him for taking the time to do this with me. Welcome to Conversations with Jennylyn, Michael.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
I am not even sure what direction to take this interview in. It's supposed to be about COVID-19, but with all the unprecedented craziness going on in the world, I feel like 30 minutes might not be enough for us, but let's try to make the best of it.
Absolutely.
So do you want to tell me, what your business group is all about?
Sure. And Jennylyn, just for your audience, I don't want them to get confused by the accent. I've actually been in South Africa for 20 years, but born in the U.S., raised in Michigan. So I don't want people to wonder, wow, the South Africans sound just like people from the U.S. But I moved here for work. I'm a commercial attorney by training.
Okay.
And an economic development practitioner by the preponderance of work that I've done in my career. I actually started my career at the African Development Bank, worked as a commercial lawyer very briefly in Miami, and then started a consulting firm that promoted trade and investment between the U.S. and Africa in the 90s, and then got an opportunity to move here to work on a project that was a fund development project. And the fund didn't close. And I decided that I felt I'd like to be on this side of the ocean doing work with companies on the continent, helping them trade and invest. So Africa Business Group is really a strategy company. And we work with the public sector to help them engage with the private sector. We work with private companies that are trying to expand across the continent or enter into markets on the continent.
Got it. So no wonder I was thinking, how come his accent? I was going to make a comment about that because I've interviewed two South Africans so far. One lives in Australia now, and on Saturday, the woman I interviewed lives currently in Cape Town. And the accent is so beautiful. And I thought, how come he doesn't have the accent? Now it all makes sense. How do you like living there?
I've enjoyed it. I mean, South Africa, and I'm in Johannesburg, is very cosmopolitan and very much an access country to the rest of the continent. So part of my interest in staying and part of what I've enjoyed is the ability to go to countries that I used to work with when I was in Washington, D.C., but it's a 4-hour flight, 3-hour flight, rather than a 12-hour flight or a 15-hour flight. And so it really has been a platform for our business and for me professionally. As we work in West Africa, we work in East Africa, we worked in North Africa. So it's very much like being in Washington, D.C. or being in New York in terms of access to other parts of the continent and the world, because there are multiple flights a day that, well, there used to be before COVID, that would take you anywhere in the world.
Right. I think that's going to change long term, don't you?
Well, I think that for the next, let's say 12 months, until we get to a point where we have a cure or a vaccine for COVID, I think travel will definitely be reduced. And what I think is promising, at least for the continent, is that we're in the midst of unveiling an African continental free trade area agreement to kind of pull down borders and promote regional integration and promote regional trade. So I'm relatively optimistic about the potential for that initiative, but also for it to stimulate intra-African travel. I mean, the continent only has around 100,000 cases of infection. So and of a continent of 1.3 billion people. So for various reasons, I don't think the scientists have figured it all out. Africa has been relatively unscathed by COVID. So the biggest challenge is, as I was mentioning, is going to be economically. The partners that Africa does business with harder. But I think there'll be interest coming out of the COVID opening up period of Kenyans wanting to do business with South Africans, wanting to do business with Nigerians, and you'll have to fly. And so I think there'll be, those flights will open up sooner than some of the long haul flights to the US, to Europe, to Australia, anywhere where, even to Asia, anywhere there's been a greater incidence of COVID.
Yeah.
Until we get the vaccine, there'll be some reservedness about traveling to those regions.
And I think we have to be careful about this vaccine thing. So many people are relying on it, and it's going to be like the end it all in some people's minds. My concern is, and I'm not even a doctor, is that these viruses mutate so quickly that we may end up getting a vaccine, but how much it's going to control that virus is left to be seen.
Yeah, I mean, two things. The speed at which we're moving to get the vaccine seems like we may be skipping some steps that normally you would take to make sure that the vaccine is safe.
Exactly.
So that's one thing. And then two, as you said, it's not necessarily the end of coronavirus 18. So when 20 and 21 and 22 come, we'll have to go back to the drawing board a little bit. But again, I think right now, with cure that anyone knows, and not even really preventable medicine that you can take, or that medicine that prevents or slows, that I think is what's keeping people worried. And so then comes the only real thing to do.
Exactly. And I think something is better than nothing. At the moment, we've got nothing. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this and hear your feel for it. I grew up in South America, which is considered a third world country. And just like Africa, it hasn't been as hard hit by this virus as you would imagine it to be, because it's third world. And the one common thread, and I keep bringing this up in my interviews because I think at the end of this all, my theory may actually prove to be correct. And I'm just doing it based on what I'm seeing. The people in Africa, like the people in South America, the BCG shot is mandatory. I feel that it's playing a part in helping to fight this virus. That's just my humble opinion. Just based on how,
Yeah, I don't mean.
Pardon?
No, I was going to say on this side of the ocean, the speculators, if you will, feel that perhaps it's because of a great. I'd be happy to talk to you in some months from now and see if your theory has panned out as you move around the world and move around the continent and get perspectives, because it's really almost like a Passover. It hit Europe very hard, it hit the US very hard, and it hasn't hit Africa equally as hard. And outside of Brazil seems to be getting hit pretty hard, but other parts of South America and the Caribbean don't seem to be as affected.
And I think it's just because you have the BCG shot alone by itself is not what's helping. I think also these countries took the whole quarantine thing very seriously and integrated it early on and mandated it, so that I feel That is probably the one that's playing the biggest part in spread. But I wanted to ask you, as an African American, no, sorry, well, you are an African American because you are American. How do you feel with what's happening in the world now with this racism?
Having grown up in the U.S. and been there when there was Million Man March, and having been a Black man in Boston, in Detroit, in Miami, and D.C., justice, um, when after the civil unrest that follows, I was in the U.S. when Rodney King was beaten, those riots. You're looking for change, and we're not getting that. We haven't gotten that, and so it's saddening. It's a time when, coming on the back of COVID, we've been home for so many weeks. The big question that I ask, again, because this is now 25 years of my life that I'm seeing this system repeating itself. What's the strategy? I mean, I'm very hopeful that people vote. Unfortunately, I don't think the White House's response has been, what is necessary to try and first quell things first. I personally, I'm a lawyer by training, so I would say the three other policemen should be arrested as well, for complicitness in terms of not stopping the officer who killed Mr. Floyd. So the fact that that's taking a long time, people get arrested for a whole lot less, a lot faster, makes people of color in the country feel like there's two types of justice. And so, the thing that I find interesting this time around is that the protests are erupting around the world. So it's not just a protest happening in the US. The head of the African Union wrote, the president of Ghana wrote, to protest the United Nations is speaking up. There's protests at the embassy, in protest planned at the U.S. embassy in South Africa. So again, the world is seeing a side of the U.S. that had, I think, well hidden to some degree. And now with cell phones and all of that, is it?
It feels like they were suddenly given permission to breathe what they've been restraining. That's how I feel. I have brothers that look like you. My mother is African American, and I must tell you, throughout my life, because people can't look, because I'm also mixed with a little bit of Portuguese and Asian. So people can't quite place, my ethnicity. I've been privy to some very disgusting comments about Black people. I worked in a company once where every morning Black jokes were sent around because no one knew I was Black. When people ask me what I am, I'm a Black woman, and oftentimes they'll argue with me and tell me I'm not Black, and I'm like, I think I know what I am. But I have to tell you, as someone who kind of is in the middle and nobody could quite place what I am, I know what it's like for Black people. And as a Black person sort of in disguise, because you can't tell right away that I'm Black, I know it's a problem. It is a big problem. And to me, the way I view it, it's pure ignorance, because if you take a knife and you cut a white person and you cut a Black person, it's the same colored blood that's going to flow from that cut. And I think that all of these demonstrations, some people think they're foolish and they shouldn't be happening. But when does it stop? And where do we draw the line? And how do we hold people accountable? Yesterday, my daughter wrote to me and she says, Mom, I'm so sad about what's going on. I'm trying to think of ways to make a change. And she asked me, what should I do? And I was stunned. I didn't know what to say to her. I go, let me think about it. So what are your suggestions? What do you think that are some of the things that people can do to begin effecting some type of change? Because we can't go on like this.
Yeah, no, that's I think the $1 trillion question now is how do we move forward? I grew up at kind of the tail end of the civil rights movement
Mm-hmm.
and was in the U.S. when African Americans got more political rights in terms of the growth and development of the Congressional Black Caucus. And now I tell people we really need civil rights because the world in varying constructs is one that follows a capitalist modem. So we don't have the economic power to address a lot of the challenges of people of color that happen. So education, healthcare in our communities, we can't really influence them. We're subject to have to use public everything. Joblessness, we're impacted. Now that doesn't directly impact racism, but it shields you from the brunt because you have your own ways of taking care of yourself. I think, the next, somebody told me that in 2045, the US becomes a majority minority country in terms of the demographics. Between now and then, I'm not sure that things will get better. They may get worse before they get better because the whole.
Especially if they hear what you just said. I think there's some people that make it their mission to try to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it can be prevented. It's like something that's a bit inevitable, but at the same time, those with power are going to try and cling to power by force, by hook, by crook. So, elections won't be free and fair. There'll be voter suppression potentially. It's a difficult time. I would say, because you see, even with the protests, there are some white Americans who are, they find it repugnant that Floyd was killed the way he was, and they're protesting right alongside the people of color. But then some of the other responses let you know that there's, people who are still quite racist. After 400 years, you would think that African Americans and people of color could live side by side. So I just think that this is a challenging period. I'm hopeful that those who are protesting can come together. I don't see the same organized structures being as strong as when I was living in the US. So I don't know who calls the meeting and everybody goes and says, okay, this is our action plan, this is our strategy. I hope that one theme that runs across the country is that people vote. Voting is still a very powerful tool to change things in the US at this juncture. And so I'm definitely hopeful that people vote and try and use all the tools of democracy that still exist and not check out or feel disillusioned and say it doesn't matter. Young people in particular need to vote. And so that's my starting point in terms of what could one do right now: register to vote and make sure that you vote early. Every time you can vote, you vote. You vote for the city councilman, you vote for the state senator, not just the president, because we also need to write laws, and we also need to have judges who support us, and those come through votes in many states now. So, but it's a bit painful because we're far. I'm far. And I'm watching it unfold. And I have lots of family still in the U.S. and you're wanting people to shelter in place so they don't get COVID. But I know when I was younger, I was also one of the people who'd say, I want to be, protesting and making the voice heard. So it's a tough time.
I jokingly said to someone yesterday, I feel like the world somehow catapulted and now I'm on Pluto. I wake up in between COVID-19 and all these protests. It feels like, because we're such creatures of habit, that everything has just gone into a different zone that we're not familiar with at all. And you're trying to find some semblance of normalcy in your life. And I feel like it's gone for now. And maybe we're definitely going to have a new normal for more reasons than one. And we just have to become more adaptable. But this black and white thing is something that, growing up a woman that looks like myself, where I could be white or I could be black, I have seen how difficult it is for black people. And today I was reading that there was some article that is now claiming that the gentleman who died while he was being restrained, Mr. Forrester, that he actually died of a cardiac problem and not because of how the police officer was restraining him. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, no, I've seen the autopsy report that intimates that he had underlying conditions and he didn't die because he had a knee on his neck, 200 pounds for 9 minutes. But to the credit of the family, they want an independent autopsy. And my thinking is, whether you had a heart attack or not, at a point when someone is handcuffed face down on the ground and they tell you, I can't breathe,
yes,
and the violation that you stopped them for is an alleged counterfeit bill, then that's depraved, manslaughter at the best, if not murder, because there was no reason for you and three other guys to stand on top of the guy for the crime that he did or he was alleged to have done. So it's those type of things, though, that response, even the manslaughter 3, which I had never heard of, those are the kinds of things that had people riot. Mm-hmm. Because it seemed like even before an indictment, the case, that the wheels of justice were rolling to let this guy off and try and look for anybody else to blame but the camera. So it's like my eyes saw this guy screaming for help. My eyes saw this guy, but my eyes lied. It wasn't that. Mm-hmm. So those are the kind of things that are being laid bare that have been happening for some time in the U.S.
And I said yesterday that our president addressed the nation and I did not hear him say that he was sorry to that man's family. I mean, everything is so surreal. Everything is so unprecedented. I don't know. I almost don't want to watch the news. And just so you know, that's why I started this series of interviews, because I've been producing television for 10 years, at the local station where I live. But I got tired of hearing people complain about the sensationalism of the news or the slant. It's either slanted left or it's slanted right. And we don't really know what to believe. I have given up watching news. Believe it or not, I do this. I just get the bare minimum, because if I let myself get glued to either channel on my television that's reporting the news left or right, I find myself getting very angry and depressed. So I just read enough to keep myself informed, and then I do other things. And so that's why I started this, so that I could speak with people like you directly. And I'm not trying to get ratings or anybody to like me. I just want to tell the stories of what is really happening in different places at different times. But being a lawyer, I know you speak You know that you have ramifications and consequences if you speak out of tone. But I just said it, and I'll say it again. I think it's almost inhumane for a president of a country in a situation like this that's creating so much turmoil. Clearly, lots of people are unhappy. He could have acknowledged that family yesterday. That's all I'm saying. I'm going to tell you right now, he's not a president that has impressed me, and I don't really care what people think about that, because
Yeah.
we give respect when it's earned. You don't just blindly throw it at people, and in my case, it has to be earned. I try to be the change I want to see in the world. How do you feel about the situation in the US, especially that you're outside looking in?
Well, I mean, I definitely am not a Republican in that regard. So it was not my choice for president 4 years ago. But you respect the office to the point that you mentioned,
Exactly. Yes.
and office seems to have shown disrespect to the world, not just by people. Again, I'm a person who believes that the world is getting more intertwined by the day, and the U.S. can't just withdraw and say it's not impacted, it's not affected. And that has been the mantra. Let me build a wall, literally, around the whole USA. So there have been many issues, I guess I would say, over the last 3.5 years that I wouldn't have agreed with, that I didn't think were presidential in terms of the response, didn't have the right decorum. I'm, now what's the word? I'm falling off my chair that there's 106,000 people or something like that who've died, and not one word of condolence from the White House. To all those families of all the hues of people. These weren't just, I mean, disproportionately African American, but African American 13% of the country. So let's say 20% of people who died were African American, but the other 80% were white American. So wouldn't you say something to them? So it doesn't surprise me that nothing was said to Floyd, and frankly, the comments, ill-timed as many of them have been since the whole protests have started. It has not been bringing peace to the country, trying to get calm. It's been incendiary almost at every turn. So, that's why, I've said vote. I mean, there's a saying that countries get the leadership they will tolerate. And many people in 2016 just decided, it doesn't matter. Maybe they didn't like Hillary Clinton that much. They thought, I don't know Donald Trump, but he was on TV and he's successful, so let's give it a whirl. Well, that to me hasn't worked out like most people would have wanted it to. There's a list of things. The economy now is at par with the Depression. The COVID response has been abysmal, I would say, because so many people died, and we don't know where even the flashpoints are because we didn't test enough. The race issue has always been kind of an undercurrent, but it wasn't cool to be
It's been
racist. So now that's flared its head again. So
unbelievable. I when this president got elected, he was not my choice for president. I decided that I'm going to be big. And I think the problem with the world is that we need to learn to agree to disagree. I'm like, okay, he's not my choice, but he is the president and I'm going to be supportive. And I keep clinging for something to justify that decision, and I can't find it. And it's gone down a slippery slope so fast that now we are in the situation that we're in. And when I travel, I get all these derogatory comments about the country. It makes me embarrassed that I'm an American.
I mean, the tricky thing is it's still, for lack of a better term, it's still a great country. It just has poor leadership right now. That's my
Right.
take.
Oh,
And
yeah, that's a great way to put it. I agree.
it needs different leadership, um, because it has so many things that so many people all around the world envy. I mean, the diversity of the country is actually its strength. Um, and if you had leadership that recognized that, it would go easily back to being number one in many areas. But in so many areas, it's fallen because of bigotry.
No, let me
You
tell you
can't.
why it's fallen. Because the people that should be running for office like you are leaving the country.
No, it's an interesting thing. So, like yourself, of different ethnicity. My father is from Nigeria. My mother is from Florida, and her family from the Bahamas. So I grew up born in the U.S. and raised in the U.S., but knew that one of my parents was from the continent. I didn't grow up with my father, but I felt like, how can I be a bridge builder? So my life and career has been about trying to build bridges between the continent of my father and the country of my mother. And the thought was really, unless and until Africa and people of African descent are having a seat at the global table as equals, not donor recipients. You mentioned the term third world countries. Um, as long as you're treated that way, African Americans will still not get the respect that they deserve because they're coming from a part of the world that is thought to be lesser, inferior. And so, a lot of the work, a lot of the things I like to talk about are linkages between the diaspora that strengthen where Africa sits. I don't know. The thing that I've learned over time is that life is not that long. So, 40 years goes by, 50 years goes by quickly, and your ability to change things are not that great. But my children are in the US, all of them. And they enjoyed growing up in South Africa, but they felt like and feel like, but Dad, the US is home for us. So I'd like them to be bridge builders like I am. But, I've given the best of me back to the US, which my kids, while I continue to try and work here on the continent to improve things here. And ultimately, that would include more going back. To your comment early on about travel, it's a big one because I spent easily 3/4 of my time traveling, and that came to a halt. And I'm looking forward to the time when I can quarterly go back to the U.S. and be there to also see how to help in that environment. But in essence, I'm happy to be at home during COVID here, but that meant that I'm not there for COVID, and I'm not there to be able to lend a voice to the vote, really, because that's the thing that I think of all of this. We need change. If we could get some political change, and then, as I said, some civil rights, start really trying to see how to maximize the billions of dollars that particularly people of African descent spend every year. How do you save that? How do you invest that? And then you use that to work with all the tools that the US gives you to work with in the political arena, in the business arena. So anyway, that's my response to yours. I don't feel like I didn't move here to say, okay, I'm leaving America. But I moved here because the work that I was doing dealt with Africa. And it's been easier to be closer to the continent. And I don't regret that at all.
Well, can you believe we're out of time?
No problem.
This interview went in a totally different direction than I had anticipated taking it. But I think it was a great discussion. And I'm so grateful you were comfortable with it. I try my hardest not to get political because I'm someone who feels very strongly about the things that I believe in. And so I hope you didn't mind that we brought some flavor into this.
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask you along the way how you really felt, because you were telling me. I was laughing, but it's a conversation, as you said. So that's the part
And
that
I
I think
try to
is,
keep it at all times an honest conversation, because I
yeah.
think that's what's missing. It's honesty a lot of times, because people are fearful of being judged, being hurt. But you know what? I'm always going to be a voice of truth for myself, at least. Before I wrap up, what have you learned about yourself during this this COVID pandemic, and what's happening now that you can share with us?
I think the thing is that I talked about how much I traveled. I'm enjoying this quiet season, and that's how I treat it. It's a season that too will pass, and so I'm enjoying this time with, my wife is here, so it's the two of us. We're sheltering in place. We go out every now and then to buy groceries, and we deal with our team at work on the phone, on Zoom. We've been using Zoom about 2.5 years because the kids were scattered, so
Ah,
Zoom wasn't new to us. And so I feel, what's the right word? It's an interesting time. There's the saying, "May you live in interesting times," without the ability to predict much. What I do realize are key is that all things digital in these next decade will just grow and flourish, because we're increasingly in a digital world. And so that's and my wife, even more so than I, appreciates technology. So I'm happy to be comfortable with technology. And you mentioned a point about being able to change. I think this is an era when those who can pivot and adapt will do much better than those who are set in their ways. And I think it's a period when people who are naturally optimistic will be better able to cope with the change that's come than those people who are pessimistic, because it's like a roller coaster. It's going to be bumpy, I think. Um, so you're going to have a lot of confidence in who you are and what you can do, and faith that God always has a plan, and this is part of the plan.
well, I can see, and I thank you so much, Michael. I know that you have other things to do and that you were gracious enough to fit me in. And I hope you've enjoyed this interview as much as I have. And
Yep, no, I appreciate it.
thank you. And what I'll do is send a link to you as soon as we have it up. And I thank you so much for watching Conversations with Jennylyn. When a conversation is all you need to be inspired, like all of the wisdom that Michael has just shared with us. Michael, thank you so much. Have a great evening, and I'll be in touch.